What's left? Programming, application, the win of strength training. Welcome back to the Omega Sports Learn to Run podcast. My name is Dr. Matt Meinerd. I'm a huge nerd, and I am honored to be your host. If you are new, welcome. Here's how it works. You vote, I create. You pick the topic, and for 2 weeks, a fortnight, I create all my social media content around that topic. If you're a regular, welcome back. I am blown away by how many people have been tuning in and listening from around the world. Fun fact, I start uploading this podcast, the videos to my YouTube. That way I can include visual examples to the verbal instructions that I'm talking about. So what do we got? We got part 3 of strength training for running. Episode 1 of this series was all about the hip. We kind of worked our way down. All about the hip. Here we go, hip. We talked about the king of the glutes, the tush. We talked about the queen of the glutes, the glute med. We talked about the hip flexors and how I don't recommend strengthening those. Last episode, I talked about the knee and the ankle, the cankle, team cankle. We talked about their business, their mission statement is providing cushion always. They're big on that. Always providing cushion for the tush pushing. But upon request, they will work overtime for hills. So that was the quads and the calves. This one, the main focus is we're talking all about programming. So we've talked about how to train the muscles like we use them with running. We talked about how to train them more. And now we're talking about when. When do we strengthen? When do we do these exercises? So of this topic, programming, there's 3 main points that we're going to go over. The first one is in season versus off season and what the focus of the strength training should be and what it should look like in season versus off season. We're then going to get into when to train the queen, the king, and the cankle, the 3 separate muscle groups, the queen, the king, and the cankle. The main focus, the big bang for your buck, the meat and potatoes, if you will, and if you don't like meat, that's okay. This is it. We're going to talk about double dipping by using cross training and strength training at the same time. And we'll get into what that is and what that means. So without further ado, I always like to lay a little foundation, a little groundwork. That way we can all be on the same page. So one particular thing I want to talk about before we go into the first topic is when we strength train, what happens? What actually happens when we strength train and we resistance train a muscle? So this is important because this is going to have an implication on the clinical reasoning of why and when we do what we do. So here it is. We temporarily damage muscle tissue. We temporarily damage muscle tissue. And so I've talked before about, what causes fatigue while you're running, when you hit that wall. We talked about lactic acid is what produces fatigue in the moment. But when it comes to strength training, it's been long debunked that it's not lactic acid that causes that soreness that next day, that day afterwards. They've done studies, they show it's all these fancy little particles, these enzymes in our body. Bradykinin, cytokine, substance P, bradykinin. And so basically when we're sore, when we train, that next day and even the day after, we're sore. Our muscles, we just did a bunch of squats. We haven't squatted in a while. And you're going up and down from the toilet. You're like, oh my gosh, what happened? What happened to me? And it can be so uncomfortable to the point of pain sometimes. But in your mind, oh yeah, this is why. You accept it. And this means you're going to be getting stronger. So the key is recovery. With all this, we break down the tissue, we allow tissue adaptation, recovering, and we get the benefits. But the key, where the magic happens, is during that recovery. And so why this is important is when we're talking about strength training, we're talking about running, if we know we're going to be breaking down muscle tissue, we want to be strategic about when we choose to do that in relationship to our running. So let's get into the first point. In season versus off season, What does that mean, and what should the focus be? So, what I mean by in season is when you are actively involved in a structured training program. Could be 12 weeks, could be 10 weeks, could be 8 weeks. If you are in a program, you have a race on the books, that's considered in season. Off season is the time between races, between those times of the year where you may have other things going on with your life and you're not yet starting that structured training program. And so when we think about it, what should the focus be if we're in season versus off season when it comes to strength training? The focus of in season is mainly improving our stability. Improving our stability. And we talked before, what does that mean? The queen of the glutes, the glute med, the glute min, the TFL, those muscles on the outside of your hip, when you're on one leg, the muscles that are controlling your pelvis, giving you stability, and our core, that's your foundation. So we're working on in season improving our stability. Also, we're doing maintenance mode. If you think about it, we're not trying to make any major improvements or really break down the other muscles, the king, the cankle muscles. So in season is mainly maintenance mode and improving stability. The focus of off season, that's where it's gains mode, baby. GAINZ. Z for dramatic effect. Gains mode. That's where we can really start to push it and really start to make some improvements in our power. When we push with the tush, we get more power out of your tush. So you ask, rightfully so, Matt, what is the point of strength training if it's just maintenance for the in season? Well, it's a great question. Thank you. I love it. You're always challenging me with these great questions. I thank you, whoever you are. So why do it? What's the point of it? Well, as we know, there's more benefits of strength training besides just breaking down muscle tissue. They show a lot of these improvements that happen are neurological adaptations. And what we mean by that is muscles are plugged in by a nerve. They have a certain flow. Think about a water hose. There's a flow through a hose. It nourishes different flowers. Nerves go to muscles. They nourish muscles. So a lot of times when we see these training adaptations, there's less of what we call inhibition. The muscles are firing more effectively. You're getting greater input. There's still so many benefits of strategic movement, but it doesn't have to be with resistance training to get that benefit. In a perfect world, this is what it would look like. Off season, gains mode. You're improving, you're working on increasing your strength and your power. And then once in season comes, you work on maintenance for that. So that's where it kind of plays in nicely. Off season is where we're really trying to make those gains. So let's break this down more. What does this look like in a typical in season versus off season? Well, this is another way to look at it. In season, body weight only your body weight. We talked about for it to be strength training, it doesn't have to be with resistance. Your body itself, you can still do strength training with your body. So in season can be body weight only. Off season can be where we add resistance to your body weight in the form of dumbbells, kettlebells, resistance bands. We're adding more than your body. So in a typical how many times per week, in season, how I typically structure it, and we'll go into this, 1 to 2 times per week, body weight only. Our goal is more stable. We're increasing our stability of the queen and maintenance. We're just trying not to lose what we worked on in the off season with our cankle muscles, our quadriceps and our calves, and our glute max, the king of the tush. Off season, 3 times per week. We're working on body weight plus resistance. And that is where we're still working on the queen. That's how powerful and important she is. We're still working on her all year long. But we're working on now more push power from the king. We're working on the cankle muscles, the quad and the calves. We're trying to help with hills. We're trying to help with shock absorption. And that's where we can add resistance to it. So 3 times per week in the off season. when do we train queen, king, cankle? So when? In season versus off season. When should we incorporate this in our routine, in our weekly routines? In season, this is how I do it, and I'll tell you the reasoning behind, and you can apply this to your programs, or you'll see why I do it with my programs. I do a Wednesday, Friday split. Wednesdays is bodyweight Wednesdays, where you're doing all three groups, the king, the queen, and the cankle. Bodyweight exercises, you're hitting those groups. Friday is still the queen. She's so important. We got to keep her happy, keep her stable. We got to keep her stable to be stable. And cross training, but I'm going to talk today about how we're going to actually use cross training, or how we can use cross training to also strength train. So here's what it looks like. Wednesday, we've got single leg step ups, we've got reverse lunges, we've got banded side steps. That way we hit all three. And I like to do a body weight exercises plus a run. And that run is very low intensity. So I would say gear one, we've talked before about gear one, gear two, gear three. Gear one is a conversational intensity for 20 minutes. And you ask, Matt, why would you do body weight exercises first and then run? I like to just be productive. And if I can fatigue my legs out before going on a run, and I know the point of the run isn't to challenge my heart, challenge my lungs, to really push the envelope, I'm only in gear one, I can make it beneficial. I can make it even more beneficial, even though I'm running at a lower intensity, by having my muscles already fatigued. I mean, we see this a lot with tons of different things, of asking the body to work in an environment that's less than ideal. You've probably heard of blood flow restriction strengthening or resistance training, where they put a blood pressure cuff or they restrict blood flow. They ask the muscles to work in that environment, and it helps to stimulate and helps to increase your body's own natural improvements. So if we can, long story short, if I can fatigue your legs out and then ask you to run, we're getting more benefit beyond just the body weight. So that's why I like to do body weight and then run. Fridays, the queen plus cross training. So I like to do a kind of a sandwich: queen exercise, cross training, queen. Example could be single leg RDLs, Romanian deadlifts, with a dumbbell amplifier. That's where you hold a dumbbell on the opposite leg. Stairmaster for 20 minutes. And you can follow that up by a standard side taps with a band, with a resistance band around just above your knees, to challenge both legs, open chain and closed chain, for the glute med or the queen. So off season, what do we got? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Every single day, we're working all three groups, all three categories: king, queen, cankle. But Monday and Friday, we're adding resistance. We're adding more than just your body weight. We're challenging more and how we use the muscles with running. Wednesday, we're still using all three muscle groups, but it's body weight only. That way we're sandwiching in the middle a less intense, a less load day. And I really like this day to capitalize on being barefoot. When I'm doing the strength training exercise, being barefoot and challenging the intrinsic muscles of your feet. Intrinsic just means where muscles start and finish. We've talked before, muscles have a starting point and ending point. When a muscle starts and ends in the foot, that's called intrinsic, versus extrinsic is where it starts outside of the foot and inserts into the foot, like your calf muscle. So, or your tibialis anterior, for example. So that's the off season. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all three groups. The intention is more and how, but middle of the week, Wednesday, it's body weight only, and we're barefoot. So let's get into the meat of this, the double dipping, cross training, and strength training. What is the purpose of cross training? What is cross training? Simply put, cross training is finding a way to challenge your heart and your lungs and your legs without the impact of running, a different way. Examples are swimming, rowing, biking, canoeing, you name it. Those are examples of, we can still get your heart rate up into different zones, training zones, without that impact, without the foot coming off the ground, coming back to the ground, without dealing with that impact load. But how can we get two birds with one stone? What's a way that we could do both cross train to get the benefits of challenging your heart and your lungs, but how can we also get the benefit of challenging your legs? Well, here's where if you use a machine, again, not all cross training is created equal, but this is a way that you could do both. You could do both strength training and cross training. What we can do is we can use machines like, I'm going to name three, and I'm going to name them in order of least to greatest amount of challenge, and we'll see what these all have in common. Elliptical, a bike, a stationary bike, and a Stairmaster. What do all these three have in common? They all challenge the king, the glute max. They all challenge the cankle muscles, the calves and the quads. But because it's not on one foot, because we're grounded the whole time, there's benefit because it's less impact, but we're not getting the queen. We're not getting the stabilizing muscles. And that's why we do a queen exercise before and after. But because we challenge those same muscles, the muscles we're trying to get, we can actually use resistance on the machine to work as resistance training or strength training. Let me give you an example. We can use, there's on all these equipments, whether it's the Stairmaster, whether it's a bike, whether it's elliptical, there's a dial that you can increase the resistance to you pedaling. You pedal, it's smooth, it's easy, you increase the resistance, and oh man, this got really hard. So what you can do to get two birds with one stone is we can do intervals. We can do a minute on, minute off. That minute on, we're increasing the resistance. We're thinking of it like, it's almost like a mini leg press if we're using the bike. We're doing a minute on, minute off. And so with that, with those intervals, minute on, minute off, and we repeat that, how would we pick it? What would we choose? What would be the level? So we go based off of feeling. All these different equipments, there's going to be different levels, different machines. A level 6 might be different. But we want to think, remember back in earlier podcast where I talked about interval training and I talked about having different gears, and you had this recovery gear, gear 1, you had a gear where we were running a little faster and running slower and recovering. Think of this like we're going to have a recovery level with taking the resistance off, and then we're going to have a part where we're challenging with the resistance on. So what it would look like, you do intervals. First one, we have a minute. We're doing everything for a minute on, minute off. So elliptical, crank it up to 6. I might test it out first. Say, all right, this level 6, how does it feel? Do I feel like I could successfully complete a minute at this intensity level, but still pull back and recover? And if the answer is no, it's too much. We got to pull it back. We also don't want it to be such that we could do this for 5 minutes. Ideally, it's something that you could do for a lot longer, about a minute and a half to 2 minutes total. But what's going to happen is as the intervals go on, 2, 3, 4, by the time we're getting towards the end, you're going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling with that resistance level, and you can adjust it and adapt it. But the key is during the end of that minute, you want to still be able to pull it back and recover within that minute. It's not going to feel great. That's not the point. It's going to challenge you, but we want to be able to not overdo it, not make it too little, not make it too much. And so what this is going to do is we're going to challenge the quads, the calves, the glutes, minute on, minute off. And we're still getting our heart rate up. And so what I like to do is for about 2/3 of it, let's say 30 minutes on the bike. For 20 minutes, I'm doing 10 intervals of minute on, minute off, minute on, minute off, taking resistance up, taking it down, up, down. And then the last 10 minutes, that's where I want to do a little more cardio, lower the resistance, and I'm going to try to pick up the intensity a little bit more for 10 minutes. And again, before and after, we've sandwiched this inside 2 queen exercises. So let's talk a little bit about the elliptical versus bike versus Stairmaster. Why is the elliptical on here? So we're upright. It does somewhat mimic the mechanics of running. Because your feet are constantly in contact with the step, with the surface, there's no impact. Impact is created when the foot comes off, and every action equal and opposite when you land. Because we're constantly in contact with the step, there is no impact. But the nice thing is when we do increase this resistance, it can challenge our legs more. What about the bike? And should we clip in or not? If we have the option, if we can have our foot tethered down or strapped down or clipped in, should we do it? Here's my opinion. And just so you know, there's no right or wrong. But if you clip in or if you're strapped in, you can then use that same leg muscle both with pushing and pulling. We talked about I'm not a huge fan of pulling with running, but when we're doing this and we're trying to still work the core, motion is lotion, we can then use our hamstrings, which is a good way to challenge the muscles that are our non-anti-shin kicking muscles to bring our foot back to prevent the overstriding or the braking. So when in doubt, I like to clip in or use a strap. That way we can recruit more muscles. Same idea. We're doing this downwards motion. We're pushing down. This is so quad dominant. And this can help with what? Hills. Stairmaster. Whoa. This is, so I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, but Stairmaster is a great way to truly challenge all three groups, as far as the cankle, the tush, the queen, and the king. And because it's on one leg, while we are picking the other leg up, we are getting some of that stability, but we're getting calf. And what you can do is you can increase the number. It's not going to change the resistance. It's always going to be the same level step that you're keeping up with. But as you increase the number, the level, it starts moving faster. You have to move faster to keep up. So I will do this fairly often. And I don't, if I hold on, it's just for a little balance. If you're taking all your body weight off, we're kind of missing out on the point. But I'll go, level 3 or 4 where it's moving at a decent pace, not bad, but I can recover. And then I increase it where I'm working, I'm keeping up with it. And I can't wait for that minute to come up. I pull it back, I recover. Just like with running, it doesn't feel great right away. But if you have that faith, if you hold on to it, if you trust in the process, you're recovering. Your heart rate will go down. Your legs will feel less tight. So Stairmaster is a great way to double dip both cardio and cross training. So we talked about this is great. But if we're trying to find a way to get two birds with one stone, this is it, using these machines. Could you use swimming for another reason? Absolutely. The buoyancy of the water, the heat, your horizontal, you can still motion as lotion. We can get resistance in all different planes. It can be way less impact. That can be a great way to still increase your heart rate without impact. So it's not saying don't do those things, but this is a way you can get two birds with one stone, and you can combine both strength training and cross training. I do not recommend running on this day. This is cross training. So we got a Wednesday, Friday, Wednesday, Friday. In the routines that I do, I have Saturday, the next day for this, off. Sunday is the long run. So this can be adjusted, but just to give you an idea. So let's wrap this series up. We talked about a whole lot. Let's talk about some of the key points. We talked about you want to train the muscles how and more than running. And what we mean by that is we want to challenge the same muscles that we use, how we use them when we run. For example, the glute med, the queen, we see people doing clamshells. Again, not wrong, but if we're trying to make this beneficial for strength training, we have to use the muscles how. And what we mean by that is when I'm doing clamshells, I'm horizontal, I'm on my side, I'm doing concentric, eccentric, the muscles lengthening and shortening, versus how we use that muscle is stability. Isometrically, it's keeping our pelvis stable. So we want to make sure we train it how. When it comes to more, our body always adapts to the demands placed on it. If we're going out and running 2,000 steps, if we're only doing a couple reps and we're not challenging the muscles how and more than they're challenged when we run, we're not going to see as much benefit from strength training. So muscles have 3 functions. They lift, they hold, and they lower either our body or objects. We talked about The queen of the glutes is on the side. That keeps your pelvis level. We talked about the king of the glutes is on the back side, the push with the tush. We talked about the hip flexors on the front that I don't recommend strengthening those due to, one, I don't recommend using those muscles when you run, and two, just based off of their anatomy. It's a third class lever of the hip. Where the hip flexor inserts into the femur, it's like picking up a long piece of wood by the very end. It's at such a mechanical disadvantage that we're putting a tremendous stress through the insertion of our hip flexor. Cut that out. Muscles. We talked about when we use the muscles when we're grounded versus airborne. Grounded is when we use and how we use the cankle muscles, which are the quadriceps and the calf muscles. We talked about the main goal, the mission of Team Cankle is always cushioning for the tush pushing, depends which way you ask them, but we'll work overtime for hills. And we talked about when you're airborne, that's where we have the anti-shin bonking stage. You're in the air, you're right before your foot makes contact with the ground, you want to use your hamstring to not bonk your shin on the cart in front of you, and you're pulling the foot towards you. You're initiating that landing and loading the weight closer to your center of mass. So we talked about that's how the muscles around the knee work and the hip when it comes to when we're airborne or open chain. We talked about the front of the shin or the ankle muscles. So I want to have hopefully an aha moment here. Muscles on the front of my body, if we're trying to move forward, when it comes to being grounded, when it comes to being on land, if I want to move forward, I push backwards. I have to push the ground backwards for my body to move forward. My hip flexors, they can't push us forward. They pull up. Same with our ankle dorsiflexors or the tibialis anterior or that drawbridge motion of the ankle, the opposite of pushing on the gas. To have more strength of your hip flexors and your ankle dorsiflexors when the main role is just toe clearance. We're just making sure we have enough motion. We talked before about if someone can lift 40 pounds versus 60 pounds with their ankle, with the drawbridge motion, with dorsiflexion, their performance isn't going to be any better. We talk about mainly range of motion is really important with these joints at the hip and at the ankle. But the muscles on the front end of the hip and the front of the ankle, I don't recommend them for resistance training for those reasons. We don't use them, and there's not a point to it. We talked about the focus of in season is more maintenance and improving stability versus off season is all about the gains with the Z. In season, we're talking about the queen. Off season, we're talking about all three. More power. We're trying to get the cankle, the king, and the queen. We talked how you can use cross training in machines particularly to help with strength and cross training by doing intervals with varying levels of resistance. In season, it's Wednesday, Friday, or 2 days a week. Both days we're working on the queen or stability, and only one day we're doing body weight for all of this. One day we're doing body weight exercises for all three groups. Run club. Here's how it goes. I get to meet you. It's so fun. You join the club. We fill out an intake form. You send that to me or it gets sent to me. You video yourself. I tell you how to do it. You send it to me. We Zoom. We share the screen. We talk. We get to know each other. I get to go over your mechanics with you. I give you an action plan. We talk about what training might be best for you. I answer any questions that you may have. And I love feeling connected. I don't just like talking to myself and hearing myself talk. I do this to connect. So I would love it to work with you. You can visit www.l2rc, stands for club.com. Prices are going to increase October 1st. Right now, it's super cheap. It's only $69.97 for 3-month membership, which includes that video analysis that you send it to me. So go and grab it and lock in your price before the prices go up. I want to thank Omega Sports. They have been keeping the Carolinas moving forward for over 40 years. I highly recommend checking them out locally or online. Of note, the views and opinions of this show do not reflect those of Omega Sports. For better or for worse, they are my own. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I really try hard to give you valuable information that you can immediately apply to your practice, to your mechanics, to whatever it is you do, just to be helpful. If you want to vote, you can vote on the topics by either following me on Instagram, or you can email the show at info@learntorun101.com, and that will be in the show notes. And you can really help support us here at Omega, me at Learn to Run, by sharing this podcast, writing a review, and please let us know, what can we do better? But I love doing this for you, and I want to do this as long as I can, and your help and you helping to spread the word helps to get this word and this information out to more people. The Omega Sports Learn to Run podcast is available on all major platforms. Until next time, bye.